to introduce Phil Calabrese, whom I'm sure most of you already know. He's been associated with this project for a long time. Phil is a mathematician. He has a BS, an MS, and a PhD in mathematics from the Illinois Institute of Technology. He published an original paper as a sophomore for which he received a 3-year NASA traineeship for graduate school. He taught for 15 years at a number of different universities. He's worked in aerospace for 10 years as an analyst and scientific programmer. He invented in algebra Boolean fractions. Boolean fractions, which are a part now of standard mathematical education. He received a 3-year National Research Council associateship that supported him further in his development of this, his algebraic synthesis of logic and conditional probability. He had a contract for a number of years with the Navy to develop techniques for uncertain conditional information processing. He's presented many papers at on quantum logic at the American Mathematical Society's mathematical reviews. So he's a real accomplished mathematician, and he said he got his educational start at the hands of Roman Catholic nuns, and followed by the Dominican priest at a boys' high school, where he learned the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. Pretty impressive. Phil, you have the floor.
Thanks, Ralph. You're very generous.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank the folks at Urantia Foundation for hosting this scientific symposium, and especially Gar Jamerson for the challenge to come up with examples of recognized scientific phenomena that are probabilistically implausible unless the universe has been designed. After all, he says, our Midwayer cousins have compiled over 50,000 examples. And then we are to write a publishable paper presenting our results. So here we go. As hard as this challenge seems to meet, I think several people have done it, including George Park, who wasn't here, but I read his paper yesterday, by focusing on the implausibility of a flat, non-designed cosmos. But it remains for contemporary scientists to admit that the cosmic background radiation is not really the same in all directions, which would be the case were the Big Bang theory true. The universe is actually flat and in rapid orbit and spin around a fixed location. The actual physical evidence of cosmic asymmetry, I should say, exists in the observed so-called axis of evil, in the background radiation, and the recently observed statistically significant greater energy on one side of the plane perpendicular to that axis, thus up-down, north-south, and so east-west directions can be defined. As of today, these inconvenient facts are mostly being ignored by contemporary scientists. Neil Kendall has identified numerous examples and methods by which to estimate the implausibility, such as the probability of evolving essential life proteins. I'm still digesting Neil's 178-page paper, or should we call it a book? As George and Neil know, disproving the Big Bang or neo-Darwinism does not in itself prove design in the universe. For instance, it does not suffice to show that some essential DNA could not be plausibly produced by unaided evolution unless we know about all other possible ways DNA might be arranged into living matter using that particular DNA sequence. That is, unless we know how the particular sequence of DNA was chosen, quote unquote, we can't estimate its implausibility. I will make this point clearer in a minute. So before I address the implications of free will in the cosmos, I would like to clarify the statistical challenge of this symposium and offer my own example. But first, we need to be clear about what it means to be incompatible with the laws of chance. In performing any statistical test, one must have an a priori probability distribution to test against. For example, knowing that wood can hardly grow unaided into the shape of a four-legged chair in a wooded forest, if we encounter such a piece of wood in the forest, then we are justified in concluding statistically, not logically, that it was designed and built by some intelligent agent rather than it evolved or emerged into a chair by wholly non-intelligent means. Similarly, if we flip a coin 100 times and heads randomly comes up less than 33 times, then we could statistically conclude that the coin is biased towards tails, because the probability of a fair coin producing 33 or less heads in 100 flips is 1 chance in 5,000. The test is possible because we have an a priori distribution to test against concerning the number of heads in 100 flips of a fair coin. Assuming the null hypothesis of a fair coin, we calculate the low probability of at most 33 heads in 100 flips and conclude that the alternative hypothesis that the coin is biased. This assumes that flipping a coin once gives equal chance for heads or tails, and that 100 flips are independent of each other. So you can see the distribution down there, and by the time you get to about 33, 34, it gets so small you can't, there's nothing in the graph. So, but here's the problem. It is the way the choice is made, that is how the sample is chosen, that gives rise to the different probability distributions for the possible resulting events. If I first shoot the arrow at the wall and then draw the target around wherever it lands, then the probability of a bullseye is 100%. It is a certainty, even though the actual place on the wall where the arrow hits is implausible, no matter where it hits. Just try to hit the same place twice. So every one of these points might be a whole other universe on the wall. So, for instance, a particular protein sequence of DNA might be just one of many upon which some kind of life could be based. Was the implausible sequence chosen randomly at first, and then life formed like a target around it? So that's the question that has to be kept in mind. We can't just say, well, this is an implausible place for the arrow to land. Well, every place was implausible for the arrow to land. This test has been published. Well, now I have a statistical test of the human authorship of the Urantia book. There's relatively good knowledge of the degree of scientific error and inaccuracy in human written scientific books and periodicals in 1955 or earlier. Those publications have become increasingly obsolescent. or erroneous over the years as new scientific discoveries were made. Therefore, there is a basis for testing a 1955 book that claims, among other things, to provide scientific information of immense value to our world, temporary help in the cosmology to support a spiritual message. And you can get that paper published in the Fellowship Herald. This test has been published, and I submit the Urantia book itself as evidence of superhuman knowledge and planning in the cosmos, which implies intelligent purpose in the cosmos. Books with so much knowledge as to provide, quote, an authoritative elimination of scientific error, supply missing pieces of information, and overall be of, quote, immense value, do not just happen by chance. Although the cosmology is not, quote, inspired, neither is it rewarmed 20th century science. In recent decades, with the advent of so now I'm going to go on to questions about free will. In recent decades, with the advent of non-invasive methods such as magnetic resonance imaging, some of these questions have received much closer scrutiny. That's the question of free will. By neuroscientists who are now able to observe living brain activities while agents are choosing. Numerous well-documented novel experiments have been performed and ideas explored. So what is free will? Can it be proved? Any amount of it. Can personal free will coexist with a mechanistic energy universe of pure antecedent causation? What happens in the brain and the neurological system when someone makes a choice? If free will exists in the cosmos, then what are some implications of its existence? And I took much of my information about what has been done in research from this book, written by Alfred Mealy, and called Surrounding Free Will, and there's about 35 different authors in here, and about, 20 papers. Definitions of free will. The standard definition, an act is, quote, free only if the actor could have done otherwise. That's one of the definitions that this book elucidates. A stronger definition, absolute autonomy, an act is free only if it is not at all determined by anything previously happening in the brain or external to it. Certain fateful human decisions might be of the absolute autonomy category, such as whether to accept eternal life. But most of the time, we're not completely autonomous. Physical determinism. Contrasting the notion of free will in the cosmos is the notion that the universe is totally deterministic, that its energy reactions are repeatable and predictable, that physics and chemistry tell the whole story of what will happen in the future. Matter, energy, and motion in space is conserved. Physical effects have physical causes. Physical causes can be traced back according to energy laws. Therefore, proximate, presently made choices are impossible. Such a choice would supposedly be a physical effect without a physical cause. In case you think this is a fringe idea, I will mention that at a recent UC San Diego talk entitled The Physics of Free Will, physicist Brian Keating started by asking how many people in the room believe in free will. Half the audience raised their hand. Then he asked the same question, how many don't? And half the audience put their hand up. So it's not a fringe notion anymore. Just last week, I saw Stephen Hawking on television in a program with genius in the title, give an argument for the non-existence of free will, citing a study that showed that the moment of conscious decision to choose a time to do something is preceded by characteristic neural activity before that time is consciously stated. So, therefore, there is no free will. And that was essentially his argument. So clever people don't necessarily get the obvious. Notice that the deterministically conceived worldview, here's a good example of how it's expressed. The jargon of free will in everyday language requires us to accept pockets of indeterminism in an otherwise deterministically conceived worldview. Nietzsche held that people invented free will in order to hold other people to blame and worthy of punishment for their misbehavior. So notice that the deterministically conceived worldview assumed here ignores the existence of those, quote, pockets of indeterminism in the cosmos called living beings. Living beings are individually not completely predictable when given freedom to operate. Ironically, these unmentioned living beings include the very conceivers of such completely deterministic concepts of the cosmos. These folks believe themselves and us to be no more than complicated machines. And they are also attempting to commit moral suicide by saying that neither they nor anyone else could ever have done otherwise. Believers in the omniscience of God have sometimes unwittingly been fellow travelers in this deterministic notion of the cosmos by claiming that since God knows the future is already determined. Physical determinism imagines the stable and uniform part of the cosmos to be the whole cosmos. In such erroneous concepts of the living cosmos, there's no room for free will. Everything is already determined ahead of time by the past energy situation, or maybe the omniscience of God. However, in a universe of living selves who act for the benefit of self and other selves, the deterministic world is merely the action field for choices. Acknowledging the existence of free will is crucial to an understanding of human life, the state of the world, and individual responsibility for outward actions. The argument, is falling rows of dominoes or bouncing balls. They have to do what they do. It's repeatable, that's physics, that's chemistry. Then they say, well, the state of a person's brain has prior energy causes. Therefore, that person really has no choice about his or her present or future acts. They are completely determined by the energy relationships existing in the brain. A free will act would be a physical effect without a prior physical cause, and that would be metaphysical, dualistic, and unscientific. There is evidence that children, and now this is in the book, there's evidence that children under 2 years of age understand goal-directed actions, alternative methods, and they recognize that certain actions reflect subjective individual preferences and desires. Under 2. Even animals appear to grasp the essentials of making choices. An animal can know the meaning of some motion and react accordingly to instinct and non-physical understanding. Many experiments and common experiences indicate that physical effects can be manifest and measured based purely on what some agent was led to believe was true. As expressed by Baumeister, Clark, and Liguri, meaning is essentially a non-physical connection. Therefore, one handy way to think about free will is the deliberate, intentional use of meaning to guide action. You are supposed to do something or not do it based on what it means. Free will belief in reality by these folks. As reported in Measuring and Manipulating Beliefs and Behaviors Associated with Free Will, other researchers here, there is even a measurable effect on behavior of merely the belief that one has free will. Those who believe they have it consider more possibilities when given choices. And reducing people's belief in free will by manipulation increases the likelihood of cheating behavior. What one believes can result in different outward actions from the outward actions that result from believing something else. That has been measured. Meaning, symbols, and beliefs are potent, non-physical causes of action. As reported by J. Ismail, Descartes argued for mind-matter dualism based on the self or mind having no parts, and therefore being non-material. An actual decision necessarily includes some amount of determinism, namely the actual effects of the decision itself. If I decide to throw a rock at my neighbor's window, then the result was determined by my free will act. That I no longer had a free will choice after the rock left my hand simply means that the rock breaking the window was the necessary deterministic result of my free will choice to break the window with the rock. So determinism and free choice go together here. It isn't as though we have complete freedom. The universe reacts when we act. Consider the phenomenon of a physical state comprising the interface between a surface of water and an atmosphere above it with some evaporated water. There's a constant back and forth of water molecules leaving the water surface, disappearing, and entering the atmosphere by evaporation, and also the emergence by condensation of heretofore invisible water molecules from the air onto the visible water surface. Condensation drops of water on a cold window pane mysteriously appear coming from some external non-watery world and seem to violate energy conservation if everything in the water world is assumed to have a water world cause. And here's some other examples. We used to think that mass was conserved. Energy and mass were conserved, both of them. Until Einstein came along and said, no, it's really the total of energy and mass that's conserved. So all of a sudden, mass is no longer conserved. The Big Bang emerging from outside time-space is another example. So somehow it's okay to think of things of this sort, but if you say, well, there's something like free choice, and I'll get to how that might be the case, then physicists start blinking. Also, since every scientific experiment is an experience in the mind of some scientist, there is the unproved assumptions that the mind's experience is real. All knowledge has undefined terms and unproved axioms. You can't prove anything until you assume something. In play geometry, lines and points are undefined. Euclid's fifth postulate, or axiom, cannot be proved from the first four postulates. It must be independently assumed. Undefined terms and unproved axioms are starting places for deductive implications. Undefined terms of science, matter, motion, life, an unproved axiom. Matter is conserved, but now it isn't. Change that. If I hold up an apple, and I use the word apple, well, anybody who's had an apple understands what I'm talking about. I don't have to define the apple. I just have to say, apple. You know it. I know it. We can move on. That's apple. It needs no definition. Free will is also a common human experience that needs no proof. Freedom to choose and change the future is a common human experience. Let's call it willpower. The feeling of guilt is quite different from the feeling of having no control over events that led to the same result. It is precisely the guilt-making poor choice that is missing in the, quote, no control situation. Since the idea of free will is so intuitively grasped by common folk, and even by the most mechanistically minded scientists, why should there be a need to prove its existence? Those who imprudently and impudently deny its existence should demonstrate that it doesn't exist, based on more than inconsistency with their mechanistic interpretation of life in the cosmos. These are some of the terms that I think we need in order to discuss or have implications for free will. We need agents, selves, minds, conscious choosers, persons. We can distinguish them some other time, but for the time being we need agents. We need some matter energy, the deterministic realm of time-space caused by or affected by agents. We need a spirit-mind-matter interface by which an agent can willfully add material energy to the physical cosmos and actualize some potential material effect. Knowledge by agents of the meaning and value, physical and mental, emotions. We need that. Just like an animal knows the meaning of emotion if he sees a tiger coming to his child. He'll stand up to the child, or she will stand up to the tiger, when she wouldn't never do that if there wasn't something else, important. And then we need time periods, past, present, future periods, during which an agent can choose to act. So there's a time interval during which an agent can make a free will choice or act, after which the universe determinism or another actor reacts to the act. Now in a vote for practicality, Baumeister, Clark, and Liguori say, we are inclined to think that deterministic inevitability is useless as a basis for psychological theory. The psychological project of explaining human thought, emotion, and especially action requires, in practice, the assumption that multiple future outcomes are possible. Free will, this is in Free Will, Belief in Reality. Some implications of free will in the cosmos. There's got to be something willpower. There's got to be an unrecognized energy source by which a human mind can affect the physical universe. It has to be understandable. There has to be choices in time and eternity. There's got to be cosmic morality. And I'll talk about the source of energy and free will. The apparent existence of some degree of individual mind, free choice in the cosmos, the ability to independently deflect matter from its course as otherwise determined by antecedent causation, implies that there is something else associated with minds not reducible to matter-energy mathematical causation, something mysterious, call it willpower, an ability associated with human minds and to some degree with all living things except the most primitive. Introducing additional energy into an otherwise closed system alters the system in ways different from how that system would have proceeded without the new energy. But that is exactly the phenomenon experienced every day by every scientist and non-scientist alike as free will, willfully doing something. This energy whereby the human mind makes the proximate choice to open the valve from potential energy to actual energy must be some unrecognized energy of pure mind. This option of mind to presently open or close the decision valve must be an innate property of mind. Perhaps a better description is in the various electrical circuits that mind can either close, make actual, or keep open potential. Making neural connections is somewhat a matter of choice as we work to accomplish some task or choose not to work and grow for the task. With new connections or neural circuits come new possible actions and patterns of behavior. If the universe is understandable, motions have meaning to mind, then understanding must be a prior foundation of the universe because understanding always transcends what is understood. Idea decisions are the basic units of mind activities. Mind understands the meaning or idea of a potential act and then decides based on its value to the individual mind. These abilities of mind are too sophisticated to plausibly emerge, there's that word again, from the mechanism alone. Water does not rise higher than its source. It is not enough for determinism to beg the question by saying these abilities emerge by pure evolution from simpler things, or else they wouldn't exist now. That's begging the question. It has been demonstrated that mind itself can give rise to outward physical effects, acts, depending on how mind understands or misunderstands the meaning of some emotion. This already indicates that mind has a way to affect the deterministic environment. Furthermore, mind can choose actions in keeping with a spiritual ideal of goodness. Will is that manifestation of the human mind, this is a quote, from Jesus, which enables the subjective consciousness. Did I say mind? Yeah, no, will is that manifestation of human mind, which enables the subjective consciousness to express itself objectively and to experience the phenomenon of aspiring to be godlike. The ability of human beings to make moral choices and change the course of material energy implies that there is a connection in the phenomenon of human mind between an inner volitional spiritual realm of choice action and the outer material realm of mathematical antecedent causation. So one implication is, since I think, therefore the universe thinks. I understand, therefore the universe understands. I transcend matter with choice, therefore the universe transcends matter with choice. In the beginning, or without beginning, there was choice, free will, or else we would not personally observe or experience it now. If there was choice in the beginning or eternally, then there were choosers in the beginning, or better, choosers who had no beginning. Finite decisions, at some moment in time, a time for decision begins, and at a subsequent moment, the period of decision is past, and the potential can no longer be made actual. The mechanistic effects, shadows, of previous choosers limit the possible actions available to subsequent choosers. However, we can know from experience that the first chooser chose to allow subsequent free choices, rather than decide everything ahead of time. While all effects have causes, first causes have original effects. And God, the first cause, decided originally to include in the finite evolutionary cosmos limited free will in the minds of personal human beings, thus giving them this unique ability. Some people somehow imagine having complete determinism with moral responsibility for actions, but clearly these are not compatible. A baby or an adult as an agent may be directly responsible for a broken dish, but not culpable, morally responsible for a bad act. Culpability requires knowing an act is not good or not socially acceptable and freely doing it anyway. It is not consistent to embrace both complete determinism and free will. Logically speaking, if there is any free will at all, freedom to presently alter the future course of events, given in the slightest or most trivial way, then by implication there cannot be complete determinism in the cosmos. We can thus discuss how much freedom there is in the cosmos. So the existence of free will leads directly to questions of standards of morality and ethics. Without free will, there is no morality because no one, quote, could have done otherwise. Then what happened? That regards agents as merely machines. Although any finite physical energy event can be traced back to its cause in the energy absolute, that fact does not imply that there is only matter energy in the cosmos. This is not the whole picture of everything. The picture of everything must include the observer, the minds, as well as the material universe being observed. The observer of the matter has the power of will, which means choices about the matter. When this power of will, partial in human persons, is followed back to its cause, then to be consistent, the source of will and the source of energy must be unified in one living and unified first source, personalized as God. So there's an original chooser. And the original chooser chose to give us some choices. The absolute source of energy and also of free will is the one and living unified first source and center, personalized as God. So science and religion do have different understandings of reality. They talk about the same universe of things, but religion adds meaning values to the same scientific facts. Science seeks to tell what and how things happen. Religion seeks to tell the meaning and the values of those same happenings. The source of both is the one God, the God of free will and uniform energy reactions, also called our Father. Moral laws are acted out in the material and intellectual world, but the facts of science are no more true than the moral laws of spiritual, volitional realm of persons. Don't do to another what you would not want done to you, and do unto others as you would want done to you. Even do what you imagine God would want done. The method of science is logic and measurement. The method of religion is to choose according to the golden rule, or, if possible, divine love, when making moral choices. What did I do? I need to get back to presenter tools here.
Go back into slideshow mode.
I think I'm, there we go. Of course, now I'm a long way from where I was. Well, I must be done.
That reference you make to Stephen Hawking
Yeah.
is a reference to Benjamin Libet experiments at San Francisco State. And Sam Harris used the same argument in his book, Freewill, where he said that when you make a decision, there's an action potential. A physical thing happens before your perception of making a choice.
Yeah.
But Benjamin Libet himself did not regard that as a denial of free will. In fact, he thought it was a proof of free will because he showed in other experiments related to that you could veto your
Right.
action potential.
Right. I had that in here somewhere, but I didn't get to it. But that's right. In a complicated decision, you have a parallel thinking going on. And inhibitions can change, for instance, what you had decided to do. For instance, how many of us have set to do something and then decided, well, I think I'd change my mind on that. So it's not a proof that there is no free will, just because our ability to say, okay, I'm going to do it now, there's some kind of a physical preliminary going on. It assumes that you can point to the exact second. I mean, the difference in time there is very small. But just because something was going on, and I can't be sure, I had come to there has to be some kind of a reaction to my decision to get to my finger, or whatever it is he's asking me to do, and that has to take some time. So, I think it's a very simplistic.
It's a tenuous. Even Daniel Dennett didn't give it much credence, and he would love to have embraced that as a denial of free will. But he couldn't, based on the evidence.
It's a big jump. Big
But
jump.
the fact that Stephen Hawking and Sam Harris wrote a whole book with that as its premise tells you how superficial their arguments are, and yet they get away with it.
What is there to prove that there isn't some preemptive will action that occurs in the brain in preparation to make a decision?
Right. Thoughts bubble up in your brain. It's a continuous stream, so it's not surprising. And actually, Libet says that himself. He just didn't read all the fine print of his study. They just ran with the conclusion they wanted.
Yes.
That's my opinion.
Great job, Phil. I'm curious, when we think about physical, mental, spiritual domains, and we think about physical as having perhaps some mechanistic aspects to it, our bodies, the world around us. Do you think there's a sense in which free will is more operative in the spiritual domain than it is in the physical domain? That perhaps, people who are very close to their physical mechanism don't get much of an experience of free will because they're not perhaps swimming in the lake of meaning or in the stream of values as much as others.
Yeah, no doubt. It's an inner experience that we can then project outwardly. And if you don't have much inner experience, you're just doing the most natural thing, then you're not really exercising much freedom of choice. You're just going along with the stream.
Right, because they refer to us as dual origin creatures. So we have that animal element and that spiritual element. And perhaps to the extent, I mean, at least when I go into the casinos and I watch the people doing this, I see very Pavlovian kind of behavior going on, which I'm not sure how much free will there is going on there. But it appears to me perhaps a spectrum of free will would be an appropriate thing to look at.
No doubt. And one person recently, I was talking about this, and he came by, he obviously was attracted to the conversation, and he's, well, you know, and most scientists will tell you we have a lot less free will than you think. I said, the issue isn't whether we have, you know, a little or a lot. The issue is whether we have any at all. If you agree that we have some, we can talk about how much. Because you've already then admitted that determinism can't be complete. So now we're talking about how much can we affect the realm, and maybe, you know, we don't have as much freedom as we think, but we don't have, neither do we have no freedom. So, yeah, you have to have an inner life in order to say, you know, I think I'm going to do it a different way. And that's what our experience is. The fact that these scientists and atheists and agnostics or whatever can live one way and preach another, how can they do this? This is not their own experience. So why are they trying to promote it? They're trying to promote it because it's inconsistent with their theory of determinism. So they want to hold on to determinism rather than holding on to their own humanity and ours. So it's just an amazing way things have continued. And now, as I said, half the people in this lecture given by Brian Keating, the name of that talk was the physics of free will.
When was this?
This was a talk at UCSD in the last 6 months. Then it was sponsored by the Harvard alumni, and they had two kinds of people in that room. The people from Harvard, they all turned to put their hands up, or most of them. And the people at UCSD putting, you know, their hand up after the second part of the question. How many people don't believe this?
So the Harvard people said they did not believe.
No, they said they did.
They did.
Tended to be. Yeah, they're a little smarter over there. In the right way.
Well, what was their basis for believing in free will if they were material?
Well, I didn't say they were materialists. No, these are just people who were in the class, in the lecture that were.
Were they physicists or?
Well, there were probably all sorts of types, just interested in the talk.
There's a question then. Sir?
Doesn't it say someplace in the book, I was looking for it, that the fact that a materialist can think about him being a materialist, in fact, disproves it some way? That he...
Yeah, just the idea that just be able to ask the question implies that you couldn't be a machine. A machine could not ask the question, am I more than a machine?
Right, something like that.
No, a man could. A man could believe. I have an easy time believing in human beings who think they're machines. But I can't believe in a machine that thinks it's more than a machine. That doesn't make much sense to me.
Along that same line of thinking, when the materialist decides that determinism is what exists in the universe, and that there can be nothing else other than determinism, is he not making a choice? Is he not exercising his free will to choose a specific point of view and a particular philosophical approach to life, for example? I mean, by the very nature of the determination of some materialists to promote determinism, they're demonstrating that there is in fact free will.
Yeah, and just the fact that they could talk about the possibility, it just, implies the opposite of what they're trying to say. It's like, and then they don't live that way either. I mean, they don't really believe that everything is all determined. I mean, they don't. I defy any scientist or physicist as a human being
Right.
to try to live that way. Well, it doesn't matter what I do here because it's, what I choose because I don't have any choices. It's just a matter of, I mean, no one lives that way. So what they're doing is they're denying their own experience. We all have experiences that say, yeah, boy, I wish I hadn't done that. And, you wouldn't say that if you thought you couldn't have done anything else. There are times when you couldn't do anything else. But when when you realize, gee whiz, I wish I had not done this or done that, we wouldn't have that experience if we didn't have some ability to make a choice that makes a difference out there.
One would like to observe how they manage their children. When their 16-year-old asks for the keys.
Well, we actually had a professor at Stanford named Zimbroff, who was a psychology professor, and he raised his child in a box. And the child didn't turn out so good. Some real problems.
It turned out the child had some free will eventually.
Well, actually, psychologically really damaged.
Why was he doing that?
Because he's trying to prove out that you can be a good parent following a deterministic model with inputs and outputs.
The child was the guinea pig.
Ouch.
Hey, just a question, I wonder if it's possible to have evolution without free will?
Have evolution without free will? Well, I suppose, in some sense, there is a physical evolution. We talked about physical evolution. That's how the basis of life is material, and all of that goes on pretty much on the basis of the energy relationships. After the power directors get through with the transcendental power directors get through with the energy, and they've made this huge galaxy that's spinning, then they say that just the usual gravity reactions are sufficient for the subsequent evolution of that galactic system. So that's evolution without any free will, because the matter will proceed. The pen that I'm holding up, it has to fall when I drop it. But I don't have to drop it. I could throw it up. I could do any number of things with it, and I'm free to do that. And I'm going to have a hard time convincing me that everything that happens is already determined.
We're talking about physical, biologic evolution?
Probably more to the development of a human being, if it could be possible to get to the status of a human being.
No,
Well,
I don't think it is.
Yeah,
it bears on the question of vitalism, because the statement,
yeah.
if the cell, if it's really true what the book says about the cell
Cell.
always seeking purposeful, I don't have the quote in front of me,
Mhm.
then that is an agent, a willful act of each cell
Yeah,
to perfect itself.
yeah.
And that is the driver of evolution. When the Urantia book says that evolution occurred purely naturally, but they've already told you that vitalism is true. So they're including the agency of the cell in naturalism. So that's what's driving the change. Now the intelligent design people don't admit to believing in vitalism. I suspect that they do. But the problem for them is to say, if you're saying that evolution isn't purely mechanistic,
Right.
then the only alternative in a skeptic's mind, a critic of intelligent design, is to say, well, you're saying there must be an intervention to cause each specific change. I suspect that if you talk to some of these people in intelligent design, they'd say, we think, that's not necessarily true, and this is what I believe, that there's intelligence endowed in the cell that is precipitating evolution. So in that effect, free will would be the driver, some level of free will for evolution.
Well, I think your question in part has, if I understood it at the end, you're asking more on the level of the individual person. And I think that's the way to approach it. The watchword of the universe is progress. And progress implies intent and purposefulness. And I mean, that's what God created for this age of the universe, the age of time and space. So if you start not saying that we are a reflection of the physical development, but the physical development is a context in which the most important evolution, which is personal, can take place. Now, according to the Urantia book, you're starting with the premise of choice and free will and decisions, and absolutely we don't move forward without those free will choices. And then I suspect we would find a great deal of analogy in the physical universe that reflects our free will choice, not the other way around.
Yeah, well, certainly free will is a function of an individual person. If two people, I guess they could agree to something, or a bunch of people might agree to something, but that means they all have individually chosen. But they are individually making choices. So yeah, it's all about the evolution of the individual person.
But just to build on that, I'm big on evolution, works in many ways, including civilization is when it evolves. And so I think that you mentioned about the test where if people were convinced that they didn't have free will, they would tend to cheat more.
Yes, that's been observed. That's been experimentally observed.
To imagine if the common belief was that we didn't have free will, it feels like that would impact the growth of civilization. And it might flatline.
Another example of that is the placebo effect. There are things that, you know, if you believe that you're getting the medicine, then 33% of people get better.
You grow.
And if you, so there are a lot of things that are causes for outward action that have only to do with our thoughts and our mind. So how does that happen if everything is mechanistic, when if you tell me something that may or may not be true and I'll react to that, it's sort of like this immaterial knowledge is somehow causing things that happen outside.
And along with the point that Bruce just made, I think virtually every educated person accepts the fact that the existence of mores in society are really to control the bounds of free will. And
Yes.
so we all become extremely dependent on that sort of thing, and that's how we can get together, we can work together and survive together, in peace and harmony, is because we accept the basic same guidelines in our choice making, and it's just inherent. It's part of social behavior. It's part of the training of our children. It's just ingrained in society, really.
Subject Nigel and I are very interested in is personality. Not all living creatures have personality. So can we say that there's free will outside of personality?
The will of personality.
I think of a trained dog that won't jump over the fence or something. Is that a low-level choice of free will choice? Without personality.
In the Urantia book, it talks about free will has to do with moral choice. It's not exactly as making I want a hamburger, It's something to do with moral choice in the first thing, and there's
That's a
other level.
higher free will.
And I don't think an animal has a choice, a moral choice. It doesn't make a moral choice.
Define that way.
And they talk about will being bestowed on this life experimental planet before we had the 6 ascended races. But they talk specifically about we became, in a sense, free will creatures, but there had been a lot of, quote, evolution prior to that time. So there's clearly some difference between free will and choice.
I think
Uh,
that nuance might be a helpful addition to the conversation.
Yeah, you want to give that back again, because I'm not sure I got what's the difference between free will and choice. Does an animal have choices but no free will?
Well, if will was bestowed, when they say, in a sense, it was bestowed, animals, I mean, this was really well after there had been some evolution on the planet. Animals had made choices, so forth and so on. There had been evolution if we look at the evolutionary chain. So there was a time at which they bestowed will. And they bestowed it before we had the 6 Sandic races, rather than on a non-life experiment planet, where it's usually bestowed at that time, or when the planetary prince comes. But so there had been choices that were made on the planet before we had will, as such.
Choices by the animals, non-human.
Yeah, it was like the frog. He chose to do it one way and the other, and that's the reason he's still here.
Right.
I mean, that's a real simplistic
Was that a
one,
choice?
but
Was
there
it
you
a
go.
choice,
It
or was that just an
choice.
instinctive reaction?
Yeah.
With personality.
I'm not sure that
With
the animals are making choices. They may be just reacting to instinct.
I think we're arguing semantics.
Yeah. Yeah, it might well.
I mean, and on Infanto, right? We're
Right.
giving clear
They made a
indication
free will
that the
choice.
first moral choice,
Right.
right,
Right.
was made at that moment.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit what Gaetan says. It's really a distinction. So I think there needs to be some parsing in the conversation as to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
You know, I was gonna say, it adds, it goes beyond semantics, starting with the premise that Gaetan brought up. Free and will are words that we can use in a denotative sense, but when they put them together in the book, it is concomitant upon personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, different category.
This is a bit lighter note, and I don't particularly get my philosophical guideline from Hollywood, but there's a wonderful movie that probably many of you have seen, The City of Angels, L.A., and there are a couple of angels involved, and one chooses to become a human. And these 2 angels, and the one that became a human and the one that was not, were talking, and the one says to the other, and to think he gave those bozos free will.
Close to home.
Right. One of the things that I enjoyed reading and was impacted by was the amount of free will as we graduate through the universe in our and the capacity to make wrong choices, to negate free will of others, and the responsibility we have. Obviously, we're here to learn what free will is all about. I mean, this is the place to at least get a start on understanding and learning to accept God's will over our free will to a certain degree. And
To make God's
the
will
power,
our choice, or our will.
and the power that free will it gives us. I mean, it's I can't even believe God gives us free will. What I just can't hardly believe it. And that creatures that as we evolve, we still have free will. I mean, that's just amazing to me. He took a lot of guts to do that.
One of the things
God
that
has guts.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
sort of slowed me down at one stage in life was the notion that doing the will of God would reduce me to one choice. But God has infinite choices. And, you know, there's a whole latitude of possibilities that are not outside the will of God. So it isn't as though we're being restricted so much. It's really, you know, stay within these bounds, and then you have lots of choices, more choices. And if you don't, you're gonna get fewer and fewer choices until you don't have any choices at all.
One of the objections sometimes encounter with people, when we talk about free will is that when they believe in God, is that the fact that it's, well, God knows everything. He knows the present, future.
Yeah.
So if he knows the future, you know what I will do. So, that was a concept that was taught at school when I was young, precognizance,
Yeah.
But then we have to allow that if God,
Predestination.
if God will know, he will limit himself by giving us free choice. So he limit himself to know what will happen to us.
They don't know whether, they say in the book, we don't know whether God avails himself of the knowledge of what we're going to do, but in any case, it's still our free choice.
I think that when I thought about that, I thought that God, the only way he would know would that, like us, we see someone doing something, you say, well, if he keep doing that, he'll kill himself. And I think God might know that from what we're doing. If he keeps doing that way, well, that's where he'll end up. But we still have the choice to come back.
Here's how I see that, one way I see it. God is infinite, we're finite. So God knows all possible choices we can make. And so God says, well, if he does this, I'll do that. If he does this, I'll do that. So no matter what he does, I know what he's going to do. I know what my reaction will be. And so it'll always finally be ultimately the will of God that prevails. Whether or not we're there to be personally there is the choice that we make. Either we eventually get within the bounds of the will of God, or we destroy ourselves.
I've always thought that if our choice is our free will to be in line with the will of God, it gives us a lot of range. If we do something that's to advance truth or beauty or goodness or some combination of that, that's like within the will of God. So it's just helpful, to me, that to think, well, how do you do the will of God? That sounds so restrictive. They'll do the will of God. It sounds very hard to do, but to just think if our actions advance those three concepts or three.
Pretty safe.
Yeah, we're safe in doing that, and that was helpful to me, and I don't know what you think about that.
Sounds good to me.
Sound good?
Yeah, they say the will of God is the way of God. So what you be instead of what you do, maybe.
The other line that I think is great is the will of God is nothing more nor less than sharing the inner life with God.
Yeah.
So if we're in a relationship with God, if we're sharing the inner life, then we are following the will of God. If we're authentically and genuinely engaging in that process. If we're not, and I don't care what seminary you went to, you got a problem.
There is a bit of an additional discussion in the book concerning the relationship between foreknowledge and free will. In that discussion, they kind of bring it down to earth and mention how, for example, a parent might be able to predict what a child is going to do under certain circumstances, but just his pre-knowledge of that does not in any way abrogate the child's free will. The child, even though the parent knows the child or anyone, whatever the situation is, what the decision is going to be, that still is not in any way interfering with that person's free will. So this concept of predestination, I think, became distorted with confusion concerning pre-knowledge and its effect on, or non-effect on free will.
And I even thought that if God would give us free will, he would in fact limit himself by allowing us to have some will in this evolutionary universe. Or else he would have created everything as he wanted.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
There is a statement, and I think it was on the screen, in the Urantia book, that the existence of free will is more than adequately demonstrated by the existence of evil in the world.
Exactly.
So but that's a philosophical proof. It's not a mathematical or scientific proof.
So, you know, in the 7 super universes, the non-perfect area, you have all of this free will out here, and so, and since you're the mathematician, do you think God knew that how many people would eventually, you know, go bad? Well, do you think he knows the percentages? And he knew it's not perfect, and so he knows it's going to be a fallout, you know, over time. And he maybe knows the end when it's finally going to go to light and life for everybody.
I think globally, God knows the ultimate state of the universes, of the grand universe, the whole master universe. So the question is, are we going to be there for it individually? If we individually choose continually until we finally are completely estranged from the will of God, then we don't get resurrected and our thought adjuster gets personalized, or maybe some other individual inherits that thought adjuster, so that the ultimate state is going to be the same. The only question is whether, and we have the choice, whether we're going to be a part of it. If we're going to be there, if we want to choose to be eternally alive, well, then we have to be coordinated with everybody else. Can't just be, you know, an island. So,
Is the question that, how can it be if God knows the future, how can we have free will? It seems to me only we are bound by time. God could be at any point. So the fact that he knows or can see at any point he chooses is irrelevant, because only we perceive the linear time.
But doesn't it say somewhere God doesn't do the impossible?
That's right.
Isn't that something impossible as an equation to give us free will and know everything we will do?
No. Omniscience does not imply omnipotence.
Or what?
Omniscience, knowing everything, does not imply omnipotence, and Ralph gave the example.
Yeah, I know that. That's what I'm saying too. I'm saying that if God would know everything, the final outcome of my life, that would prevent me from exercising my free will, wouldn't it?
No.
he's saying, God is saying that since God knows everything, that God doesn't do everything, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the other word there. That's
Omnipotence means doing everything.
If you're watching a little bug crawl and you see something bad is going to happen to him, he has no idea. He's making choices. Just because you know what's good, you can't transcend time, but in a sense, by having a greater view of space, you can see something that's going to happen to this bug that he's not aware of, but that in no way precludes his choice in moving.
Well, choice is not exactly for me free will. Free will is the capacity of knowing what's wrong and what's right. It's arbitrary. And I don't think a bug has that, so I cannot compare that to a bug.
But if you go back to his original, Phil's statement that at least a primitive form of free will, and they seem to imply that cells have agency. In other words, they could do something other than what determinism has forced them to do. They're not entirely deterministic. I don't think bugs are entirely deterministic.
there is an explicit statement that probably by the Melchizedek that we don't know whether God chooses to know ahead of time what we're going to do. So if they don't know, people who are a lot smarter than us, or beings I should say, whether God chooses to know, because ahead of time what we're going to do, I don't know whether we're going to be able to.
Wouldn't that be then pure
figure that
justice? Justice without mercy? To know exactly what we do, then it would apply his law right away, then I'd be dead a long time ago. I did so many crazy things, you know? But then he gave me mercy.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for me, you know, it's not a black and white thing. I think God has limited himself in that knowledge of what could happen to me because he has given me free will. And for me, the equation is to mix the two together is like impossible. You cannot know what I will do because he has given me complete free will on my choice of life. Yeah.
That's why God is merciful, because he does know what you're about to do.
Phil, when I was asking that question about that, what I was implying at is not that he knows the future. Okay, I was kind of what I was kind of thinking of is, what if God knew that out there that 1 out of every 10 billion people are gonna go bad, okay, but he just doesn't know which ones. But he knows the statistics. Is that a possibility?
You know, when they asked Jesus that question, how many will be saved?
So he doesn't know.
His answer was, just as many choose to be saved and to do the will of God. That's how many will be saved. He doesn't answer the question other than in that way. Bob?
David,
David, but
I'm
it's
sorry.
almost the same thing. What was I going to say? Oh, I think Neil's putting God into a non-time limited area opens up enough doubt, but at the same time, I kind of want to pick up on a comment. It was Sue who said it, that, oh my God, what a chance by giving us free will. Well, starting from the moment that never happened, that the I Am qualified himself, there was a limitation that went on there. But we're also told that God the Father delegates everything that he can. If it's possible to delegate, he delegates. So there's a self-limitation. And then something that seems paradoxical, that God would be limited by the awful limitations of everythingness were he not to, and then it gets into relationships and more qualifications. And so the point is, there's paradox, but there's also the fact that God is very willing to qualify and limit himself, which puts the whole question into a different category than most people see it, because it's either God is completely omnipotent and omnificent, and I'm not sure what the next one is, or we have free will. But there's obviously paradoxes in different qualified levels, and God does have a lot of faith to be able to limit himself and give us the wheel sometimes.
Could I bring it back just to a couple of quick quotes about free will? One is from 16:8-7. The relative free will, which characterizes the self-consciousness of human personality, is involved in moral decision, highest wisdom, spiritual choice, truth discernment, and more. Creature personality is distinguished by two self-manifesting and characteristic phenomena of mortal reactive behavior, self-consciousness and associated relative free will. So I think we really need to keep free will in the realm of personality and choice from that.
Machines don't make choices. Sometimes you see people talking about the computer program will now make a choice. No. The programmer made the choice. And the computer program is executing that choice. Otherwise, you couldn't debug the program. You know, you wouldn't know what it was supposed to do.
Just kind of on a broader base on this topic, and mercy was brought up there by David. So, broadly, if there's an individual that doesn't believe in free will, I don't know that limits them being a wonderful person and growing a tremendous soul, in a sense. We are just at the very beginning of our long career, and there's a lot of mercy for different behaviors and beliefs. And so the import on this one lifetime, if I'm a staunch believer against free will, it's not all that bad of a thing potentially if I live a moral life or something. So it's a kind of an interesting first step of how we find our place in the universe and our relationship to the cosmos. If I feel like my life is being controlled by everyone, and I develop a belief in free will, or not in free will, God understands that I don't believe in free will. And so in the long run, what we believe for a few decades is not necessarily the most important thing that's measurable in the measurement of this lifetime. broadly speaking.
Nigel?
Perhaps a way of clarifying, separating out the choice from the will here is thinking of how choice is a function of the mind domain. The mind chooses what to do. But the person is flexing will. And this is what the thought adjuster is engaged with here. Not so much with the ups and downs of the mind, but the intent of the person.
Yeah, good.
Well put.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't say also the characteristic of personality is free will and self-awareness.
Yeah.
An animal don't have personality, but they can make choice. Choice is something different. And sometimes animals make choice because instinct, not because they think about, oh, is it good or bad? No, they just are hungry and they will eat it. They see an animal that's going to eat them, they're going to run away because,
And all of that being a function of mind,
yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
not the person.
Brain, maybe.
Doesn't involve moral choice, which is arbitrary. In
Well,
French,
and
we have
in
an
an animal,
expression.
they can overcome their natural instinct to make a choice. I mean, we train dogs to do it all the time, I mean.
There's a
Well,
great
they have some intelligence in some way, but what I'm saying is that in French we have an expression for free will. It's called libre arbitre. It's a little bit different in English, and it explained that libre arbitre means that you arbitrarily make a choice based on some moral decisions, moral choice. You see, it's a higher purpose of mind than is just making a choice to eat something, or go this place or this place.
I found a quote that has both choice and free will in it. God provides for the sovereign choice of all true personalities. No personal creature can be coerced into the eternal adventure. The portal of eternity opens only in response to the free will choice of the free will sons of the God of free will.
I'm not sure I see a distinction there. It's just like you don't want to use the same word.
Yeah.
It gets boring to see
Yeah.
the same word. So you use some words that maybe you can distinguish choice and free will. I'm not sure I can.
Find the definition of free will in Urantia book where it says where free will applied to human, and it's quite different than just choice.
Yeah.
Choice is mind.
Well, I don't know, maybe animals make choices that aren't free will.
They're not moral.
Well, not every one of our choices are, or wills, our choice or our exercise of will has to do with a moral. I could be walking down the street and I need to get to the corner over there, and I can go east and then north, or I can go,
That's
north
your
and
choice.
then west, I guess, to get to the same place. So,
But I would see that
or I'm
more as
sorry,
a-
north and then east, or east and then north. I get to the same place, but it wasn't a moral choice, it was maybe on whimsy, I wanted to see this, or I got tired of going that way. Those are not moral choices, so a lot of choices are not moral.
So like if a frog has a fly that's this big on this side and a real big fly on that side, he's gonna go for the bigger fly because it wasn't a moral choice, it was just bigger food.
And there's somewhere where they talk about I forget exactly the quote, but about how important decision is. It's like
Yeah, it's another
decisions and
word.
decisions
Yeah.
and decisions.
Yeah, and I suppose it might be helpful at some point to make these distinctions, but when people are saying, well, you don't have any freedom of choice or will, maybe we better make sure
Get them there.
of the first part of it, and then we can decide how much choice and how much will and what the distinction was here.
Well, Jesus was playing with the dog, I think it was on the Rome trip, and
Yes.
Dana asked him, does the dog have, does he survive?
soul?
And Jesus said, well, he makes choices based on his needs or interests at the moment, but he lacked the will, lacked personality with the will personality, and the human had. And so he sort of broke it down that way, but mostly it seems to be interchangeable based on the the quality of the issue, the importance of the issue.
Yeah, I remember that story between Gannon and Jesus. I don't recall right now how he said that soul, he doesn't have a soul, if I recall. The animal doesn't have a soul, doesn't have a, so.
I think, you know, we have to remember we're dealing with a revelation. And as a good friend would say, the top-down approach would be to realize that from the standpoint of the spiritual universe, it's our value-oriented choices. That's all. Everything else, whether you turn right or left at the block,
Yeah.
as far as the universe is concerned, those are just kind of adaptations to local situations. But really, from the higher standpoint, free will is all about values. Truth, beauty,
Spiritual meaning.
But we also have free will when there aren't any value particularly. I mean, what is the value of my going north and then east versus my going east and then north? It could be absolutely arbitrary.
I'm saying from your standpoint, for sure. From the standpoint of the revelators, free will really kicks in when you make that moral choice to flee north to avoid some kind of moral consequence.
And if I just do it because I wanted to see that direction, or
the reality response is you don't get your thought adjuster for turning left at the end of the block because you wanted to see the garden.
No.
I think what they're trying to do is they're encouraging us to make moral decisions that will grow our souls. And so they're differentiating a real free will choice as something that literally, in a sense, will eventually move us out of this level of reality.
So you'd say that using the word or the expression free will usually pertains to the value choices versus
in the book.
versus just choices that have no value aspect.
So you're saying there's a subset of free will choices that are relevant to one survival.
One survives.
The others,
Yeah.
One
Which have to
survives.
do with truth, beauty, and goodness, those choices is versus just.
Yeah. God is interested in our loyalty.
Yeah.
And so we can't be we have to be free to, be loyal or not. And so that's why we're given so much latitude around here. And they've sort of quarantined us so that because they don't want to be infested with the disloyalty to God that seems to be somewhat rampant on the world.
Well, then brotherhood with men is part of the, God pays attention to your sense of not just loyalty to him, but brotherhood of the.
Yeah, be loyal to your brothers too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're loyal to God, then you're going to be loyal to God's other children. So I mean,
Well,
you're
yeah,
going to be good to them.
You might have the one part of the problem. You could be a humanist with a wonderful contribution to humanity.
Yeah.
And I think God would probably say you did a good part. There's value in that person.
Well, it's about 3:30 and you have a choice, Phil.
Yes.
One of the really powerful concepts here is that all we can really do is discover, recognize, interpret, and choose. So it's that choice that the person is making which actually can allow an adjuster to lock a fibre of Urantia into the soul. It's literally building the soul out of that type of choice. Not a choice about what direction to walk home, but this discovering and interpreting, recognizing and choosing at the end of all that is what the thought adjuster, is the lever the thought adjuster can grab onto.
I think another piece that helps is that those free will choices help grow the supreme. So that's what they really can contribute to.
Yes, we're building the supreme, providing an experience.
They talk about all the memories you're going to have after you get to the Urantia state and how the interaction with people, you seem to remember all of those stories, but you probably won't remember you making your choice, you know, going east or west, but you might, if you're not interacting with a person and it's a value choice, like Art said, then I guess you would remember that type of choice. Like if you decide to make the turn because you want to help your grandmother versus a choice of, no, I'm just going to go down and go get a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah.
So maybe those choices get remembered when in your next existence. It has value.
The book mentions the trifles of living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we won't remember much of.
Right, in contrast to what Dick is
The
talking about.
the things that have meaning and value.
Exactly.
Here's a definition of what I want to say. The relative free will characterizes the self-consciousness of human personalities involved in moral decision, highest wisdom, spiritual choice, true discernment, unselfish love, brotherlyhood service, purposeful cooperation, group loyalty, cosmic insight, the grasp of universe meaning, personality, dedication, wholehearted devotion to doing the Father's will, worship, the sincere pursuit of divine value, and the wholehearted love of divine value giver. So, do you think animals have that?
No.
No.
But they can be courageous.
I made my point.
Okay, here's a question from our radio audience, our visual audience. For you, Phil. Free will seems crucial to the observation of a decimal planet. Do the other 9 have less free will? We're not going to answer, that's your question.
Take it away, Phil!
They said that one of the book tells us that one of the things they worked on was giving this humanoid race free will early, and we got it earlier than the others. But I'm sure they have choice, and so do they have less? We got it earlier, and you can tell that in a 2-year-old. We don't call them terrible 2s for nothing, because they are. By 2, no, I'm not going to do that. Where do they get that? If they were just a machine, they would be programmed and be very docile. So I don't know whether or not ultimately, in a non-decimal planet, people have less free will, but if we got it early, it wouldn't surprise me if we got a little more latitude. And now, those life carriers is maybe scratching their head and saying, maybe that wasn't so good an experiment.
It's taking us longer to
So help me with this, everybody. My understanding is that free will on a normal planet doesn't come until the planetary prince. But that we got it 500,000 years earlier without a planetary prince. In some sense, does that add to the compounding of the problems of our planet that we had free will for 500,000 years when we were very primitive and very amoral?
I don't think so. My sense is that they were testing it out and they brought us free will early, and then we had the 6 Sangic races. So that the choices that were made in those races and as they dispersed were free will choices, perhaps. Had we not had the rebellion, I think it might have proved that it enhanced our development to bring free will earlier. But I think because we had the rebellion, we had no way to really guess how is it better?
Somebody ruined the experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the,
Exactly.
that was the thing, is that did the free will come, and instead of the races appearing sequentially, they all appear at one time. I mean, that's maybe the question, here is the, we're looking at this experiment, and we're looking at all the, yes, we do races first, no, we don't. Yes, we give free will for, no, we don't. And we were in that, we fit this block, and this was the experiment, but then things went awry.
Have we mentioned that the quote about the difficulty the 7 mind agents had reaching, contacting life on our planet? There's only one other planet in Nebadon that was more difficult for this contact with the evolving form of life here. So I think we're gonna take some time.
I was just gonna suggest that, I partially going back to the thing I quoted Neil about before, that this is, the context for this is very much time and progress and evolutionarily oriented. And Marta's point is excellent. In the long run, that 500,000 years would have been resolved and even improved upon. And during those 500,000 years, there might have been a different question, but in the long run, that would have worked out. If you've ever had a chance to see, there's other people who have done this, but John Roper's list of all the ways we're different, it goes on for pages and pages and pages. Usually people can name about half dozen or a dozen, such as the experiment with doing the word decimal planet, that the bacteria problem, and you know, and on, but it's a tremendous number, and I would suggest that on this planet, in a time-bound context, those things have, because we got off track, compounded and complicated and made a bigger difference from the point of view of what we're talking about. Had those rebellions not happened and the default by Adam and Eve, it would be a different story.
Yeah.
But free will is probably abrogated to a degree, or I mean the effect of it.
But you know, despite all these problems, they tell us that they learned, what, some 26 important facts as a result of the decimal experimentation. So it wasn't all lost.
No, there's not all lost.
A huge benefit.
Their wisdom was our loss, or?
No.
There was.
Our loss is their wisdom.
It'll work out.
We're done.
Yes. Thank you.
Garden,
Phil.
you're coming up.
Yeah.